Hey everybody, it's Connor from the Steel Lodge, and today we're checking out this monster, the Asus TUF OC RTX 3090 here. This is the model I was able to get my hands on quickly, and luckily I didn't have to battle people online because I have a local retailer here that I could just order this online without really a hassle and run to the store and pick it up. But I feel for all of you that had a tough time getting one of these online because it was a hassle and they just went off the shelves immediately. Now, as far as my CPU goes here in my computer, I have a 5900X, so that's definitely gonna bottleneck the 4090 here in a lot of scenarios, even at 4K resolutions, and I'll go over that in the benchmarks. Here I have two synthetic benchmarks, and then I test well over 10 games here to see the performance in a lot of the really demanding titles, and just some titles I wanted to check out. But if you want me to check out more titles, let me know in the comments down below. And I actually think this is a pretty realistic scenario for a lot of people. A lot of people didn't upgrade to Zen 4, or they don't have the newest Intel processors, so they're waiting on something like Zen 4 with X3D, which is what I'm waiting for to upgrade my CPU, so that way I really won't have a CPU bottleneck, hopefully, and that is a lot better gaming performance than the Zen 4 processors we have right now. We'll dive right into the benchmarks here, starting with the synthetic ones and then getting into a bunch of gaming ones. As far as temperatures go here, I never saw the card really break 72 degrees Celsius, so I'm really impressed with the thermals we get here on the card. The first test here is Port Royal, which is a synthetic ray tracing test, and you can see our percentile here is a 99th percentile, so we are blowing out basically every other PC in existence right now, and these cards will get to more people, so this will go down over time, and I haven't messed with benchmarking, but very impressive result here, and it's definitely a little bit higher than the FE models I've seen online. Time Spy Extreme was the only other synthetic benchmark I ran because I was definitely more interested in actual gaming performance, but here the graphics score is very high once again, landing me in the 99th percentile, and this was a little bit higher than the FE scores I saw online from some website as well. Starting us off, we got Cyberpunk 2077, and it's worth noting for this one that the update that includes DLSS 3 is not out yet for the public, just the press has it right now. I ran two benchmarks for this one with the included game benchmark, and then another one where I run around Afterlife and then drive around the city around that area, just to give you a better representation of what actual gameplay would be like. Now for this, I'm using DLSS at quality settings and completely maxed out everything else. The frame rate here is good, and I never really saw it drop below 60 FPS. Definitely doesn't go below that frequently at all. And if you want to get higher, like the 80 FPS range on average, consider dropping things down to DLSS balanced mode, and that is still a very enjoyable experience to have here. One more issue with Cyberpunk at the time being is that the current driver garbles the map and makes it unusable, so hopefully there's a hot fix for that soon. Overall, the performance here for Cyberpunk 2077 is outstanding though, and the game looks incredible with all the ray tracing settings enabled. Now we have Dying Light 2. This game was pretty demanding on 30 series cards when you enabled RTX features. Here I have the game completely maxed out with RTX features enabled, and I have DLSS set to quality mode, and you can see the average is very high, just over 100 frames per second. If you drop down to DLSS balanced, you can probably average in the ballpark of 120 FPS at 4K. For benchmarking Dying Light 2, I ran around the open world for a couple minutes and also fought a number of enemies. Here we have Kena. Now this is one of the best looking indie games ever made. It has visuals on par with some CGI movies, honestly, and this one's made on Unreal Engine 4 and was really demanding on some older hardware. Now this one did have some stuttering problems back in the day, and we still do get some stutters here and there, but overall it's really good, and this is running at maxed out settings with no DLSS at all, and we're above 120 FPS for our average, which is incredible. For this title, I benchmarked it by just running around the forest environments, which you spend most of the game doing, and fighting a few enemies here and there. Next up, we have Total War Warhammer 3. I love this game, and I wanted to throw a RTS game into the mix here. This game is running at the Ultra preset, and it has the Blood for the Blood God enabled here, so there's a lot more blood splats on the field. Now, for this one, I ran the campaign benchmark and the battle benchmark here, and both of them give very impressive performance numbers. For the campaign benchmark, I just ran the normal campaign benchmark and not the Immortal Empires version of it. Next up, we have Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered, and for here, first I ran without DLSS enabled at all, and then I went ahead and used DLSS 3 with frame generation to see the difference. Now for this title, I am definitely limited by my CPU. For the majority of this run, I actually saw my GPU hanging out in the 70 to 80% usage range, so there's definitely performance being left on the table here by my CPU, and I'm running maxed out settings, but I am using object range of 6 for ray tracing, as that setting is very heavily CPU dependent. Definitely for this title, if you have a faster CPU for gaming, it'll work better here. For Digital Foundry's analysis, I saw them breaking into the 100 FPS range when using no DLSS or just DLSS 2, and then using DLSS 3, they were breaking into the 200 plus FPS range at 4K with maxed out settings. For benchmarking this title, I played the opening segment of the game and spent a few minutes swinging around the city as well. Now we have Resident Evil Village. For this one, I played a bit of Mercenaries mode, just the village map for both of these tests. The first test here I ran at max settings at native resolution, and the game gets destroyed by the RTX 4090, so I decided to crank things up a ton and use the image slider in-game to turn things up to 2 times resolution. It's not really clear if it's both axes that gets multiplied by 2 or just the overall resolution, but I think that we're playing at 8K here maxed out, and we're getting around 50 FPS, which is pretty incredible. All RT features are enabled here as well, and I really think that the RE engine does great on relatively high-end hardware. On to Baldur's Gate 3 now. I'm running the game using Vulkan, and this game is still in a pre-release state. Hopefully it gets ray tracing features or something down the line. This one I'm not using DLSS at all, but we are running the game maxed out. For the benchmark here, I ran through the opening area of the game in the Mind Flayer ship and got in a few combat encounters as well as some dialogue with NPCs. This game looks great and it runs fantastic on the 4090 here. Now we have Control. This one's built on Remedy's own engine, and I think this one's a great title to test out again because it was one of the first titles that really got a lot of RTX features and DLSS. Now this one gets destroyed by the 4090, averaging around 120 FPS when we're running maxed out and DLSS at quality settings here, so it's great to be able to play this game on a 4K OLED and just have it running completely smooth at 120 FPS. For the test here, I explored a decent amount of the building and got in a couple fights also. Days Gone is developed by Sony Bend, and this title runs on Unreal Engine 4. For this one, I spent a while biking through the opening parts of the game and exploring a bit, and we do really good here, averaging 150 FPS with 1% lows around the 74 FPS range. Definitely want to play this one through on my PC here now. Now we have the Crysis 3 Remaster. This one's completely maxed out with no DLSS right now. The game does have that built in though. Average is pretty impressive, as was 1% lows for a very demanding game. Alan Wake 2 is on the horizon, so I wanted to test the remaster of the first game. It's built on the Northlight engine, and I'm running maxed out settings here with no DLSS, and you can see our frame rates are great. I just ran around the forest a bit and fought a couple enemies, and our 1% low is even almost 120 FPS, so a great experience on this one here. Here we have Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, and this game looks amazing with the ray tracing that it has built into it. Here we average over 120 FPS while gaming at maxed settings with all the ray tracing features on, at DLSS quality settings, so definitely recommend checking this one out if you have a 40 series card, as it's a visual treat. For this title, I just tested the opening couple minutes of the game as I lost my save data unfortunately, but I expect the later open world areas to be a bit more demanding maybe than what we see here. Now we have Death Stranding, made by Kojima and produced by PlayStation. This game runs very well and is made on the Decima engine, the same one used to make Horizon Zero Dawn. Here we're averaging over 140 FPS, and this game's running maxed out with no DLSS at all. It does feature DLSS also, and the game's capped at 240 frames per second in the engine, it seems. Also, cutscenes on this one run at 60 FPS unfortunately, and you can see that this graphics card would have no issue pushing the game much further in those cutscenes here. For this, I just ran around the opening area of the game for a couple minutes, and made sure not to get any cutscenes in the benchmark data here. Here we have Red Dead Redemption 2 completely maxed out, running with DLSS quality mode, and this game runs very well also on the 4090. I was honestly kind of blown away with the fidelity of this game, running at such a high frame rate because I've never seen it running at a frame rate like this before. For this, I opted not to use the in-game benchmark and just ran around the open world, committing some crimes, and just really giving the game a good couple minutes of playtime here. I wanted to include one of my favorite recent indie titles, and that's Severed Steel. This game has really cool voxel destruction and pretty intense ray tracing. So this one here is running at maxed out settings, with DLSS at quality settings here as well. I just went through a couple levels of gameplay here, which might have affected the 1% lows between the loading screens, but overall the average frame rate was very impressive for this title. Now here's Tales of Arise, one of my favorite games from 2021. This game's built on Unreal Engine 4 and has an anime art style, and this game just gets completely crushed here by the 4090, running at maxed settings. You can see we're breaking the 200 FPS range for the average, so really this card does not sweat it at all for a game like this. Testing this one out, I played a late game area and ran through a couple different combat scenarios and just around the level in general. Here's another one of my favorite games, Devil May Cry 5, and this title just gets completely destroyed by the RTX 4090 here. I'm running at maxed settings, and we're averaging over 300 FPS, and this game still looks phenomenal. It's really unfortunate the ray tracing features on the consoles, the latest consoles, didn't make their way over to the PC because this game needs something here to slow it down. You can definitely crank up the internal render resolution for this one, probably all the way to the max. For testing this one, I just played my way through the opening level of the game and experienced some of the cutscenes, which are actually usually the more demanding areas of the game in my experience, but it doesn't really matter for the 4090 because it just destroys everything here, and once again, this is running on the RE engine. Here we have The Witcher 3, and this game's always popular because it's just so damn good. Now this game's averaging over 120 FPS maxed out, with hairworks and everything completely cranked up, and here there's no problems playing the game. For this, I just ran around the world a bit on Roach and fought a few wolves and monsters. Now this game is slated to get an enhanced version later this year, hopefully still, which should have ray tracing and other features, hopefully things like DLSS, so we can still crack that 120 FPS range for the average frame rate. Here we have Hitman 3, and I opted to play through a level instead of using the built-in benchmark. Here we're playing through the end of an era level, which I think is one of the more visually demanding levels if you have ray tracing enabled. There's just reflections everywhere. Now the ray tracing in this game is extremely demanding, and here we're using quality DLSS and averaging right around 80 frames per second. If you want to get close to that 100 FPS range, maybe drop this down to balanced. If you turn the ray tracing features off, this game runs way faster, but honestly, there's no reason not to enable them here on the 4090 because the card is just so fast. And finally, we have Crysis Remastered here. Now this title is definitely notorious for being very CPU bottlenecked, and at certain scenarios here, I could see my GPU being used 50%, so definitely running into some massive CPU bottlenecks here and there in this title. At certain areas, I would get 140 FPS, and then in other areas, I'd get 50 FPS. So it definitely just depends on the area you're in, but this game definitely has a big CPU bottleneck overall. For this, I just played through some of the initial areas of the game once you get into the first village. As far as settings go, this title is completely maxed out with the Can It Run Crysis graphics settings, with quality DLSS, and the experimental RT features enabled. 128.23 was our average FPS across 24 runs here, and there's definitely some titles like Devil May Cry 5 and Tales of Arise that might have inflated this a bit because they both broke past 200 and 300 FPS respectively. But overall, this is an extremely impressive result for the RTX 4090 here. A lot of the games that you might have needed DLSS for in like performance mode, you might not even need it at all anymore with ray tracing features enabled, which is just incredible. Overall, I'm extremely pleased with the performance of the 4090 here, and I better be because this card is not cheap. So if you have a lot of money to drop on a card like this and you want to play games at 4K 120 FPS, just completely maxed out, then definitely it's a great option for that. But that's going to wrap it up here, guys. If you like this video, consider checking out my channel for a lot of Steam Deck and PC gaming content, and consider subscribing. Other than that, have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.